Dear viewers across the world, most welcome to my channel NAGA World Conflict Zone. Context: Israel and Palestine. How the West's opinion of Israel may be changing. Another round of exchanges of fire followed by a negotiated ceasefire between the Israeli occupiers and the Palestinians is complete. This is the never-ending cycle of violence and destructions because of the injustice and humiliation the Palestinians have suffered at the hands of the Israelis for more than 70 years now. Unless true peace and justice is reached, we can expect similar attacks to flare up again. Security for one group of people living in the same territory as another group will not be attained unless the member of both groups feel secure in their homes and on their lands. Attempting to evict one group of people and replace them with another will only exacerbate the situation and will not result in peace and security. This is the reality that Israel refuses to accept because it feels confident in its power and is immune from accountability as long as it is protected by the US. The latest round of attacks did, however, ignite an unfavorable turn of event for Israel. Even if every conflict has two sides, otherwise it would not be a conflict. Controlling the narrative and public opinion is an essential component in winning any conflict. How the story is framed, including the words used and images published, help to gain and maintain official and public support once there is a more persuasive argument that challenges the dominant discourse and grab people's attention. It causes questionable and rejections. The latest escalations in the Israeli-Palestine conflict exposed the strength and weaknesses of the dominant narratives on both sides. Those on the side of the Palestinians are aware of the historical fact that led to the creation of a state of Israel at the Palestinians' expenses, as well as the suffering and deprivations of the Palestinians and their right ever since. This fact and reality on the ground, however, have not been widely or adequately explained and delivered beyond the region. They are most often overshadowed by other crises and conflict and undermined by internal divisions and mismanagement. On the other side are the powerful, rich Western countries and those under their influence who promoted the right of Israel to exist as a haven for Jews who had suffered from discriminations, particularly during the Holocaust, in lands far away. By trying to atone for their bigotry and atrocities against the Jews, the West supported and continues to support Israel politically, financially, militarily, and in the media, turning a blind eye to any atrocities it commits. For people in the region, Israel is a sore reminder of the Western colonial and imperial legacy, a malign foreign body deliberately created to serve the interests of the former colonizers. Israel calls itself a democracy and a civilized state that is surrounded by barbaric people and autocratic states. Such words and their framing are important to understand in the wider context of Islamophobia and the demonizing and negative stereotyping of Arabs and Muslims in the West. A closer look at Israel exposes it as a racist, militaristic and fundamentalist state, which is what a Human Rights Watch report released last month. Determined, Israelis authorities are committing the crimes against humanity of apartheid and persecutions. The report stated its findings were based on an overreaching Israeli government policy to maintain the dominations by Jewish Israelis over Palestinians and grave abuses committed against Palestinians living in the occupied territory, including East Jerusalem. A few other significant changes contributed to the reconfigurations in the balance of worldwide public opinion on the Israel-Palestine conflict. Social media has provided a platform for immediate, raw and torching footage by Palestinians of the destructions and abuses they have suffered. This has garnered overwhelming support and sympathy around the world. Platform tried to censor the Palestinians by blocking hashtags and suspending actions that referred to the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood of East Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa Mosque, where this latest round of violence erupted after the Israeli security services forcefully tried to displace Palestinians from their homes and attacks worshippers. Such aggressions and violations of human rights infuriated Palestinians in many cities and towns and caused them to rise up in a much-needed show of unity. In response, Israel went as far as bombing a tower in the Gaza Strip that housed media offices in an attempt to silence local and international news coverage under the guise of targeting terrorists living under the inhuman conditions of blockade, poverty and threat in Gaza, described as the world's largest open-air prison. We need to ask who is being terrorized and dehumanized. Calls by Western countries for human rights to be upheld and defended right hollow when these same nations refuse to acknowledge the abuses and violations committed by Israel and bring it to justice. Some even prevent peaceful demonstrators from expressing their support for Palestinians or callously raise the flag of Israel over their institution in the show of solidarity. Claims that Israel has the right to defend itself need to be challenged by asking, who is the aggressor? We finally heard a change in the tone of the discourse in the US and other Western nations, and a noticeable shift within Democratic and Republican parties to take the tougher stance against Israel. The presence of the conscientious politicians, especially those with Arab and Muslim background, and other supporters in the corridor of power is giving the Palestinians a voice which had previously been muffled and their very existence obscure. It remains to be seen how the Palestinians and their supporters will be able to build on and cultivate this term of event to reach their ultimate goal of having an independent, viable states where they can live in dignity. Is it really possible? In future, time will say what can be done. So, world is silent because Israel is the rich country in both sides, militarily and economically. Maha Akil is a Saudi writer based in Jeddah.